All right. Welcome everyone for our March meeting for the Madison, Wisconsin user group. We're going to be talking about permission sets and profiles because I don't know if you know, they're going to be going away permissions on profiles. And we got Jake Brushafer. Did I get that right, Jake?
Close enough.
Close enough. To do a little presentation. But before we dive into that, we're going to go over our normal overview. See, there we go. So we're actually made up of both Milwaukee and Madison user groups for the folks who are new. And so we have myself, Brian Kwong, and Jen Bowen. We handle the Madison side of things. And we have Squire, who handles the things over in Milwaukee. But we all basically work and help and talk to each other and figure out topics and things like that. Because we're one big happy family. Squire, do you have anything you want to announce regarding the Milwaukee side of things before I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to say that we've been approved to have a new co-leader joining Milwaukee. Rachel Huntington is going to join the team. We're in the midst of completing all the paperwork, and we'll add her smiling face to all our documentation and start to have more than just me in Milwaukee. So I'm excited about that.
Yay! Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
So why are we here? Well, essentially, we're here to help each other. We're here to network, to learn from each other, from both our successes and our failures. There's no such thing as a bad story or a bad lesson learned. It's all things that we are going to share with each other. So we basically improve ourselves as what we do with our Salesforce lives and make ourselves better admins, developers, and whatever particular role we happen to be in. So to that message, we want to hear from you. We would like to have speakers from our own user group, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be a 45-minute, hour and a half presentation or anything like that. It could be 15 minutes. It could be 5 minutes. It could be, hey, I had this particular problem that that was introduced to me by my organization, and this is how I solved it. It could be, hey, I went to try to take the certification exam and I failed, and this is what I learned because of this. It can be, hey, I learned about this new product or this new feature in Salesforce called Flow, and I built a whole bunch of flows, and oh my gosh, did I screw up our org, and this is how it happened. The things that happen to us that aren't successes are just as important as our successes. And in some cases, they're more important because we tend to learn more from our failures and our successes. And we can help other people not repeat our own mistakes by kind of sharing them out. So if you have a tip, a trick, a little short story, something that you are excited that you learned about, we want to hear about from you. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to have slides. Like Squire packed in mind, it could be 5-15 minutes long. Reach out to one of us and we'll be happy to talk to you about it and get you on a future meeting. So there's a whole bunch of community groups and organizations that go on in Wisconsin. We have the Milwaukee admin group and the Madison admin group. We have the developer groups. We got nonprofit groups. We got marketing groups. I don't know what's going on with Salesforce Saturday. Jen, what's going on with Salesforce Saturday? Anything these days?
No, I'm sorry. Not here. Milwaukee, though, I think does it more than we do.
Yeah, I still do it. I run the developer. Yeah, I do developer and Salesforce Saturday Milwaukee. I try to do a session every month for Salesforce Saturday. I had to skip this month, but we'll be back in April.
Where can people go to register for it or find more information?
You can
about
find
it
it on Meetup just by looking for Salesforce Saturday Milwaukee, and that is where it is located. It is right now it's still virtual, so anyone can attend still.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm gonna look for the link and drop it in.
Yeah. How are you liking the virtual Salesforce Saturdays? They work it out okay?
It's more work.
It's more work.
Because you have to come with a presentation.
Okay. I haven't done Salesforce Saturdays in person or virtual, so I can't comment. Upcoming events. So we have some larger community group stuff that goes on. As folks may know, Trailhead X was just, what was it, last week? But coming up, there's the Midwest Streaming that is actually going to be up in Minneapolis. That's coming up in August. We got Witness Success also in August, which just happens to coincide with Midwest Streaming in the same area. But there's a whole slew of other dreaming events and other things other than Dreamforce and things like that. And you can get that on the calendar that Salesforce provides. So anyone have any announcements? People have jobs that they're looking to fill, or anyone got new certs or something to celebrate, or just generally shout out?
I can't remember the last meeting that I've been at. I got my MAPS partner accreditation, I think back in January.
Cool.
It's an interesting one for sure.
I didn't realize there was even a MAPS accreditation.
I think they launched it later last year. So
Okay.
it's, if you work in MAPS, it is definitely at least beneficial going through the training. I found, as we've done a couple of MAPS projects now, and it's definitely helped out an awful lot.
Cool. And let's see, Josh says he got his app builder and business analyst cert. That's awesome. Congratulations. And Eric passed his marketing cloud email specialist at the start of the month. So congratulations. That's fantastic. John says we're in a room together. I, Myra, Rock, got my data architect cert. Oh, that's very cool.
Way to
Well
go,
done.
Myra. And hi, Myra.
Hi. Everybody's been busy the beginning of the year. That's awesome.
Yes. So at this point, I'm going to
Wait,
hand.
Brian, sorry,
Yeah.
one last thing. Baird is still on the hunt for 2 Salesforce roles. One is a platform developer, which is basically our way of describing a declarative admin who speaks in the programmatic side, so Lightning Web Components, Apex, JavaScript, etc. And then we're also looking for a senior admin, someone with some team, not necessarily leadership, but more like the technical guidance, mentoring sort of space. Both those openings are posted on our Baird careers site, but if you've got a question, reach out to me as well. And we're happy to talk through the details and et cetera, et cetera. So still looking. We have a bunch of really fun people to work with, and me.
I may actually have a job post and share. I'm just waiting for it to actually be official and be posted. So in between, if anyone has job posts, feel free to post it in our Trailhead community groups. So I'm terrible at transitions. Oh my goodness. So with all that, we're going to hand it off to Jake, who's going to share his Aloha permission set groups, Aloha profiles. And I'm not sure which one you're saying hello and goodbye to, Jake.
Hey, that's the trick of the trick. No, it's goodbye profiles, because I figured, hey, you can say goodbye to something before you can say hello to the new thing. So goodbye profiles, hello permission sets. And realistically, they're not different. They're not new by any means, but the way we're going to utilize them is going to be a lot different. But before we get into that, just quick about me. I work at Penrod. I'm a Salesforce MVP. I run the Milwaukee Dev Group, and also I run the Milwaukee Salesforce Senator Group.
And Jake, just right now we can see your desktop, just so you know.
Foobar.
I know.
Let me.
There's a lot of stuff on there, though. I think you need a little housekeeping.
It grabbed the wrong one.
It's because he only has the 2 monitors.
Right.
Is it good now?
I can see. Yeah, you just want to throw it.
Yeah,
in
it's
presentation
the
mode?
window of your presentation, so it's not full screen.
All right. I just want to make sure.
There we
There
go.
we go. Thank you.
All right. I don't know that I selected the right one, and it's still. I don't like Zoom.
Zoom is hard.
Lynette is waiting in the waiting room, by the way.
Thank you.
About me, I'm Jake. I work at Penrod. I run the Milwaukee Dev Group. I also run the Milwaukee Salesforce Senator Group. If you want to follow me, Twitter, that's my handle. I also have a YouTube page if you want to watch any admin tips and tricks and anything of that nature. All right, so let's talk about profiles. After the spring 26 release, major profile features are going to be moved over to permission sets. So this is not So this is something that you can actively do now so that we can kind of plan ahead of time. The new features are enabled in spring 23 to start beginning this transition. Just remember, the longer you wait on making the transition to permission sets, the greater risk you're going to be for when this rolls out in spring 26. So get ahead of it, get yourself, your org set up before. Don't wait till the very end where you have to scramble. So just get on that and keep moving forward there. But before, some of the things, profiles aren't technically going away. They're still going to be there, just not going to be as robust as they once were. Profiles are still going to control your login hours and your IP ranges, your record types and app defaults, your page layout statements. I think dynamic forms will play a bigger role in this when it comes to specific views in the future, but for right now, profiles still control those things even after spring 26, as far as we know. So there's nothing you can do about that, and that makes sense because if you have multiple permission sets, how do you tell which one's going to be the default record type you want to know? So it makes sense to still live on the profile. And this Salesforce introduces another way of managing that type of material. So what does all mean moved over to permission sets? Your user permissions, your object permissions, your field permissions, all your tabs, your record types, not to default, so you can still add additional record types to a person's individual. You can add additional record types to a person that aren't defined by the profile. Your apps, your connected app access, your Apex classes, your Visualforce pages, and any of your custom permissions, that's all going to be on permission sets. You won't be assigning any of those things anymore on the profiles. All right, so like I said, time's not on our side. We want to get a move on this. This is not something that you should take lightly. This is something that you're going to have to put some time and effort into. You're going to have to, think about what you want to do here, and I have some suggestions on ways to do it. But for like existing orgs, this could be considered its own project. Taking everything you have and moving it over to permission sets could be a huge undertaking depending on how your org set up. So like I said, don't wait to do this. If anybody has a newer org or is just getting started in Salesforce, I would probably start incorporating permission sets from the very beginning and kind of bypass the profiles and just kind of get your org set up on permissions from the very beginning instead of waiting to make the change. Otherwise, you're doing the same process twice. So just make the change. I would say start making your changes as soon as possible. All right. If you're not familiar with what profiles and permissions do, essentially a profile, it tells you what your base permissions are, and then you use to add permission sets and permission set groups to it. And then you gave your total access, what you could do for that user. That model is not going away. It's just most of it's going to sit on the permission set in the permission set group side of things. So the profile here, they're not going away. It's just most of the bulk of the work's being done in this section here, which is a lot more versatile than what a standard profile is. So there's a couple of ways we can go about doing that. But I also want to review permission set groups because I have a lot of content around what permission set groups are. I just want to make sure we talk about what they are. Permission set group is a collection of permission sets. And there's a really cool added things you can get with a permission set group. One being a muting permission, which means that within that permission set group, I can create a muting permission, which will say, negate this access depending on what I state. So let's say I have 3 permission sets here, and I have permission set 1, 2, and 3. Permission set 1 grants read access. Permission set grants read and edit access to an account, and then permission set 3 grants full blown access. But if I create a muting permission, which takes away the delete access, this user who would have this permission set group no longer has the delete access, and there, even though permission set 3 says they could have it, the muting permission would take away those rights. Remember, this only applies to the group. So if you add things outside of the group to the user, they gain those rights that way as well. So it's still cumulative property, but within the permission set group, you can negate certain effects. That I think is going to be a good player for what we want to do when we set up permission sets moving forward. All right. Just a little thing to think about if you do want to go down a permission set route. The biggest thing here I want to point out is that you can only have up to 100 permission sets in a permission set group. So just be mindful of that. If you're going to create a lot of permission sets, you put them in a group, just make note you can only add up to 100 in there. I have lot of questions for you for adding 100 permission sets to 100 to a permission set group, but that's another story. On like I said before, if you have a permission set, you can add that permission set. Doesn't just have to be part of that group. It can be part of. You can just assign it manually to a user as well. It's just typically you have a permission set group, and then you can add in the additional permission sets to that group, or you can add those same permission sets outside of that group to the user. We'll go back to this page here. This right here is a very dynamic here. You can have multiple permissions, multiple permissions groups assigned to an individual user, just like you can now. Managing that is where it can become a little tricky. So there's some strategies and how to move around that. So you may be wondering, why should we move over to permission sets? What are the benefits of it besides Salesforce telling us we have to? You can now assign field level security permission sets when creating a new field. So this is what I'm saying. If we get ahead of the game, we can enable that feature. You can start assigning your fields to the permission sets that they apply to. Another cool thing with permission sets is the expiration date now. So if you ever had to give out the delegated admin privilege for a period of time while you're away and then you come back, well, you can say you have the admin privileges for a week, and then when it comes back, then they're back to their other privilege. So you can actually expire permission sets to individual users. So that way, you don't have to. You can set it, forget it, and then you don't have to worry about changing it back. So that's some of the cooler things that are coming out with permission sets here. So I have a couple of different models that I kind of see, and I'm pretty sure there's gonna be other ones. Like this is a learning experience for just about everyone because we really haven't had to do this. But I see a couple of different ways of doing this. There's the 1-for-1 model where we basically take every profile we have and convert it to a permission set. We have the 1-for-1 group, same concept, but we create a profile for a group, and then we have the custom where we just kind of live life on the edge. All right. So the first model is the 1-for-1 model. And like I said, it's pretty much where you take your profile and you create a permission set for it. Very straightforward, not a lot of confusion around that. But you may want to think about, if you want to employ that model, you could just be inheriting the same problems you already have. So if you currently have a lot of profiles, and then you have to do a lot of conversions of those profiles to permission sets. There is a convert to profile permission set tool you can utilize for that. So there is an easy process to that. If you are on this is like the fastest way to work with it. So if you wait to the very end and you need to move things over, this might be the route for you. But let's not wait to the end and get ahead of it. But you may have an org that only has like 6 profiles, and maybe you're not seeing that growth. So maybe this makes sense for you. It really depends on the size of your volume and what you want to do within the what you want to do with your environment. So my first model here, it's just a 1-for-1 conversion. It's pretty straightforward. Not much has changed. You can use automation to auto send permission sets based on the profile name. So if you create a profile that is called sales user, you can create, that's a bad one because that's a standard one, but sales user custom, you could create another permission set called sales user custom. You can use a flow to, when a user gets that profile, to auto assign that permission set to them. So it's just one way to automate your process too, if you don't want to add permissions after the fact. All right. And by the way, if anyone has questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. All right.
So Jake,
Yeah.
you said something about having like over 100 permission sets in a permission set group. What if we're doing a one-to-one object model where we are creating one permission set per object to provide FLS and read functionality?
Then I would say you probably want to go towards the 1-for-group model, where you create if you want to create a permission set for every single object, you could do that. But then I would say you want to apply those permission sets to the permission set group. If you providing you have less than 100 objects in your org. If you don't, then I'm going to say you probably want to group your, and this is kind of where my custom model comes into place. You may want to group those things in a different area. Maybe you have a generic sales user permission set where you have a bunch of your objects in there that the generic sales team uses, and that encompasses a lot of your different objects. So you have the kind of your core in there. But I think we'll talk about that on our next model real quick here. But the next one is the 1-for-1 group model. Basically, you build a permissions group that matches your profile, but then you break up your different permission sets, and this is where kind of the sales model may come into place. You can take the different parts of your permission set and break it up, and then you can reuse those across the different groups. So if you wanted, let's say you want to go to the object model, if you created a lead, you could have your lead permission set, and you could have a read lead, you could have multiple ones, and if you want, you could specify which access they have at that point. Or you could just do the full-blown lead has access to everything, put it in the permission set group, create the mute permission to negate the things you don't want in there for that particular permission set group. So you could go create a permission set for every single object in there. And then you could then take away the access after the fact. So, but just be mindful, if you do that, it's only applying to the group. If they have more than one permission set outside of the group, those permission sets would then be applied at that point.
Which method do you think is easier for maintenance purposes and for debugging? Doing the adding everything and then we're using basically the negative permission set to remove permissions after the fact to the group, or just be very targeted and saying this is what they will have?
I think the targeted is going to be a better approach for most people because of the fact that you can assign permission sets outside of permission set groups, which could inherently give more access than you're intended to. So for the very dedicated person who's going to be watching those accesses, if you're only assigning one permission set group and no other permission sets, I think this method works perfect. But if you maybe are in an org that doesn't have as many experienced users or are a little more lax in the rules, you may not want to have as wide open permission sets available for people to just add ad hoc, and rely on and then because if you go that way and you try to rely just on the muting part of it, it could potentially backfire because you could just start granting access to additional things, especially if you have an unexperienced admin that says, oh, here's the lead access one, you just grant lead access to the user, and now they're gaining additional access to things. Remember, this is a per user thing too, not just a hey, I updated the profile. So a single user could get additional access without another user that has a similar role without them having the same access. So it could become cumbersome in that aspect as well. I think a more targeted permission set of a generic sales, and then having, so like, let's say we have sales permission set, and then we have a sales manager permission set where they have those added properties to them. I think that makes more sense to add those to a permission set group. So you could have a permission set for sales, permission set group for sales, and then you just add the permission set for sales to the permission set group. And then you could have permission set sales group manager, and then you could have the two ones, the generic sales, and then the one where they have additional rights to that as well. So I think that's a more sustainable approach of doing that. But then you still, if they grant one of those other permissions outside of the permission set group, it's not going to impact them. The reason why I like using permission sets groups is because if you do a lot of different permissions, you can easily assign a permission set group and get a bunch of permissions versus individually managing all those permissions outside of it. So like the assignment of it could be very cumbersome. So if you have multiple different, if you did go down the object level, you could add all the individual object, the individual permission sets to the permission set group, then just add the group to the individual to save yourself time of having to, instead of having to assign every single one of those permission sets to yourself. Does that answer your question, or did I just ramble on for half an hour?
No, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, like I said, it comes down to preferences and how much time and effort you have to put into it. Like I said, permissions to have that muted, they do have the ability to have muting permissions in there. You can set up a single permission set and then reuse that in multiple different types of groups. So like that sales one I said, you can use in multiple different groups. If you have a core, you build like a core permission set that can be utilized across the board, you can put those in different groups and then just add other permission sets for those additional things that they may need to do their job. You could use that 1-for-1 method, but add other permissions. So you could essentially create a profile permission set, but then you could also add other permissions to that group. Maybe you always know that particular group always needs this other additional permission set with it. So you could have your one-for-one, you could have your sales user custom permission set, and then you could have your other permissions all added into the permission set group too as well. So you can apply tactics from both of them all around. I think it's going to be, like I said, a learning experience through this whole entire process for what works best for your org. And these are just some of the ways that I'm seeing utilizing this process so far. Like I said, you can also use automation. So if you do the profile name with a permission, it's a group that matches the name, you could utilize that automation in the future using like a flow. All right, and then the last one, it's like I said, custom. This is where you kind of just build it as you see fit. And I could see this being all over the board, using combination of the two that we used before, using your own custom models that you may employ in that process. Basically, you build the permission sets as you need them. It could be a per object model if you really want to. If you're only using 18 objects, well, then maybe you only need 18 permission sets, and you can assign them as you need. You can also do the different groupings, like I said, like a sales or service or anything along those lines, and then just add additional permission sets as they're needed, depending on the roles that they need for that particular for their job function. I think the biggest pain point is inconsistency. I think the biggest thing is if you're going to pick a pattern, stick with it for everything. That way, if you know how to debug that way, if you come in and you're like, okay, well, we follow the permission set group, why does this person also have these 6 permission sets in here? Like, why are they here? Should they be part of this group? So I think that would make it a little bit harder if you're just all over the board, because now you have to kind of evaluate everything. There is some app exchange tools that you can use to evaluate access, but that's not going to be the easiest way, just to kind of quickly look at the permissions that are available to them to figure out their access. I mean, the custom model is a lot more flexible because you're going to build it as you want, but with flexibility comes the pain point of not being consistent. And then it's also going to be harder to automate if you don't have set rules of if this person needs this thing, that type of thing. It's going to cause you're not going to automate. You have to manually control everything on your end to make sure they have all the proper accesses they need. There's not going to be any automation really around that point because you have no clear standards defined. All right. And just so if you're wondering what I'm talking about, the automation to assign role, basically when users create updated, you can go find a permission set that matches that profile name. Then it basically create a permission set assignment that matches that for that user. That way they have the access that you want them to have based on that profile. All right. I have a whole slew of resources. I'll be sending this deck to Brian in a little bit here. I do recommend checking them out here. This one right here is the app exchange for the figuring out what access a user has. So if you want to check that one out, I recommend checking that one out. It's pretty cool. Actually, and this one here is if you want to read about the archival on how to convert a profile to a permission set, that there's tools out there ready to do that. So you can easily check out those resources to get yourself up and running. There's some more on the next page as well. This one's a good one by Cheryl. The future user manager kind of goes through why they're doing the things that they're doing. So if you're interested in why they're moving this way, you can get in here and you get into the insights of what they're predicting for the future as well. All right. Any questions around the model here or any questions in general?
I have one. My question is, you talked about permission sets and we can manage user assignments with permission sets. But we also have permission sets groups where you can also manage assignments, user assignments to the group. Are you saying to try to avoid mixing and matching those, or do you think that that is okay?
I think you can mix and match, but I wouldn't. If the permission set you're assigning to the user is, as long as you're not assigning the same permission set that's in the group, I think it's fine. I think it's going to be confusing if you're going to be assigning ad hoc permissions on top of permission set groups. Frankly, if they're adding permissions to a user, does that automatically mean they get a new permission set group? Maybe on that, it really depends on your process. But if it's like a lot of people that are going to have that, maybe that is a permission set group that you need to add additional permission sets to versus just adding an ad hoc one. But like I said, remember that mute, if you are using that mutant permission, it only applies to the group. It doesn't apply to the overall user. So if you give them a permission set within a group, add a mute to it, and then you create another, assign the same permission set outside of the group, they still have access based off that permission set outside of the group. So it's a cumulative process outside of, not just within there. So the muting permission only applies to the group within there. So that's why I was like, you may not want to add additional permissions outside of the permission set group, especially if you're using that muting permission, because then it negates kind of the whole, it could potentially negate the whole reason why you're using the muting permission.
I mean, it sounds like if you're going to use permission sets groups, they're basically almost representing your profile in that case.
Yeah,
and
that's kind of what I would envision as.
Yeah, and then if you're going to have to add any ad hocs, there are exceptions to your groups. So just like, you know, today you may have a profile and you have that one user that just happens to need to have extra permissions on a particular object or something along those lines, that you would create a permission set just for that one user. But you wouldn't include that exception permission set in any of the other groups. It would be, you would have permission sets that will be in groups only, and you would have permission sets that'll be on users only. Is that basically what you're saying, Jake?
Yeah, that's basically what I was saying. Is that if it's part of a group, I wanted to reuse it as just a single permission set.
I have another question. I gotcha. So that's helpful. You talked about automation. And you talked about automating the assignment, I think, to like a permission set.
Yep.
Can you also automate the assignments to like permission set groups?
Yes.
It's my understanding that the API name of a permission set and permission set group cannot be the same.
I think that's correct. I've never tried. I've never tried that. So
it is correct. It will bark at you and say you cannot create a permission set group with the same name of a permission set, because actually I don't know if you have the Jen Lee blog in here.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's a really good one to read, and she actually talks about some of that automation
right here.
Yeah. And she talks about the reason why. So I think for our strategy, what we've done just to kind of share, or at least we try to, or I've tried to, is when you're naming your permission set group to say like PSG after it, because then that way you avoid the error message of you cannot name this permission set the same as another permission set, even though it's a permission set group.
Then you're already adding great content to the ever-growing knowledge base of good naming strategies for your permission sets and permission set groups.
Which means if you're going to go the route of having ad hoc permission sets, you should probably come up with a naming convention to easily differentiate the permission sets that are intended for groups only versus the ones that are intended for ad hoc.
Am I stealing your thunder, Jake? I'm sorry.
No, I think it's great content because, like I said, this is a newer topic for a lot of people. So I'm open for discussion because I want to get other people's ideas too. And this came from a vacuum in my mind. So it's great having other people's inputs as well.
That's an impressive vacuum, Jake.
Yes, very impressive. But yeah, I would just if you try it in the sandbox once, try creating a permission set and a permission set group that have the same name, and it will bark at you and say you can't do that because it already exists, and you're going to be like, what are you talking about?
I mean,
it
makes sense because I think they're, like you said, they're essentially the same object behind the scenes.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you talk about the automation of saying like, oh, if the profile equals this, go match the permission set that matches your profile. Well, that might not actually work.
I mean, that's the generic and the simplest form of doing something. You You can build a more complex flow of saying, hey, if it's the, build a decision, if it's this name, go get this. If you know the exact name of the group, you can go do it. I always do it the simplest get version of, if you already have a value, to go assign it based on that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that makes sense.
Or
I
go
would-
crazy and use custom metadata to say this is how everything's supposed to be, and use automation to do it.
Yeah,
I have a customer who wants to use that using SAML payloads, which is your single sign-on attributes coming in when you log into the org to actually automate assignments. So they would be managing those permissions somewhere else, like in Active Directory or something. So that's a way that you might use that automation.
That is intense, Andy. I
That sounds
couldn't-
ripe for failure.
that I just well, it wouldn't be in my it's not in my toolbox, right? Like I don't have access to whatever other thing necessarily, or the skill set even to manage that in Microsoft Access or wherever else it is. But interesting that someone's taken it to that level.
I've seen it before.
Really, yeah.
I mean, when you've got, thousands of users and you have this one place where you manage your users and their security settings, that's a really important functionality.
It makes sense, yeah. We're
Yeah,
not
we
that
we used to do
sophisticated.
something like that, but the real challenge becomes trying to keep two systems in alignment. Your system of record for the permissions and profiles or Salesforce, and you have to push them over to AD so you can map them to write them back. It's a good idea and a terrible idea. So
Hey, this is what my customers want to do. I'm not saying that it's the best idea.
it's not your recommendation. What about, I mean, and maybe, I don't know, Andy, you might know more than anybody. What about the user access and permission app that has kind of bubbled to the surface in some of the release notes and stuff? I think was it a labs tool at first and kind of been gobbled up? Do you know?
Other than demoing it at Dreamforce, I don't really know much about it.
Okay.
But yeah, that was what it was supposed to be becoming, was that there was this tool that was a labs app that was supposed to become more official, meaning that a Salesforce Labs app, for those that don't know, is an app on the App Exchange that's developed by a Salesforce employee. It goes through security screening and then is available to you. But that means that that continued development is up to the Salesforce employee who did that. So by bringing it into the release house means that it should be actually like something supported by product.
Is this the app you're referring to?
Yep. And it's good. It's not great. It needs some love. And I wasn't
Oh,
sure
yeah.
it was moving toward kind of what you're talking about, is that you wouldn't have to create a flow. You'd have an interface that just does a better job of managing. So
I was
Is
just
this
thinking
the
about
one? Sorry, is this the one like that Cheryl Feldman has been talking about then? Like,
I think so, because I think that I got this off of one of her other documents that she posted out there.
because I think that's
because isn't it, there's like a beta version or something on the platform now. It's not an install anymore.
Yeah, there's you have to
Reference.
sign up for it. It's underneath user settings. There's a you have to turn it on.
Yeah. So just something to keep an eye on. Not recommending it yet, but it could answer a lot of these questions in the next release or something. So
yeah, user management settings. I'm just looking for it. Field level security for permission sets.
Nope, that's
No,
from-
that's a
nope.
different one.
you
That's
gotta
for
you gotta sign up
during.
for this to even have it light up in your list, I believe.
Oh, really?
Oh,
yeah,
it's
it
like-
might be
it's
in
like
the
a-
dev org.
Yeah, it might be like one of those pre-pilot sign up approval things. So again,
Yeah, the
not
one, the
enough
only one that
information
I'm
to actually talk to it.
seeing
yeah.
is the field level security. This is important though, and very much related to all of this. So field level security for permission sets during field creation. So
Yeah.
like think about right now when you do create a field, you get the screen where it says, well, what profile do you want to add it to? Read only, blah, blah, blah. This would actually give you the permission sets that you could toggle. I honestly didn't even see this one in the
Yeah.
release. So
I don't recommend turn that on until you have this figured out.
good point.
Because if you turn it on, you have to go back to your profiles and add the permissions to every single profile you want that field to be
Oh
updated.
no, so it's like one or the other. It's
Yeah.
not like adding, it's replacing profiles with the
Yes.
permission set.
So get your permission sets figured out first, then
Oh.
turn on that feature.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I was like ready to toggle it on, cowboy it in production.
Yeah.
It's also beta, so
True.
Yeah, figure out your permission sets before you turn that on. Otherwise, you will every field you create, you have to go to every profile and update the field of security for that.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Anyway.
So I have a question, Jake. So future state will just be, profiles will just be like the same for everybody except for system administrator pretty much. And then all the add-on permissions will be, no. Okay.
There's still a couple of things that still live on the profile. So you still have your record type defaults
Okay.
that most people are going to probably still use it, and the page level assignments. Because
classic page layout assignment.
well, technically, you can do lightning page layout assignments to.
By prof. Yeah, you're true. That's right.
Most people don't, but you could. But yeah,
Okay.
for most people, the page layout assignment is for that classic or the details of the lightning page layouts where that assignment comes into play.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, there was someone that posted in the chat too about user access policies. Did we cover that? Is that the same?
I think I focus mostly on the object. I think if you go down one of those like sales profiles, you can put those accesses on one of those. So if you have the accesses you want identified for that, we'll call it role, which is not a bad, which is a horrible name because there's a whole nother thing called roles. That persona. So if you add those user access policies to that persona, you can emulate it off of there for that individual. But yes, the user access policy does apply to this whole process because it's not going to live in the profile anymore. It's going to live on permission sets. So you could, in theory, grant a lot of accesses to user access depending on what your current settings are based on your permission sets.
I don't know if that answered kind of the question that was in the chat.
I think the
But
question was
thanks.
evolving the app that you had up,
Gotcha.
user access and permissions, that the name of the beta was user access management.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. There's so
So-
much, it's hard to keep up with all of those changes. So there's more questions in the chat. I'm going to go through Jonathan's because I'm really excited to answer this one. So in dynamic forms, can sections be restricted via permission set assignment or permission set group assignment? So we use dynamic forms quite a bit in our org. The sections on dynamic forms are the biggest challenge that I think we have. So can you hide sections based on permission set assignments? I think you could, but I would highly recommend, I mean, yes, I think the answer is yes there. I think that I would highly recommend Brian's blog that I love to plug anytime I can, which is talking about custom permissions and utilizing custom permissions in your permission set potentially to hide different sections.
I mean, that goes through for anything on the Lightning page that can be hidden or displayed by the Lightning page. I literally just looked at it and I forgot what it's called.
The other thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's whatever controls the conditional, whether or not something is hidden or shown.
Right, the conditional filters, but there's a
Component
couple-
visibility.
There you go, component visibility. However, there are tricky things with sections, so you have to be careful because if you're on the edit, like if you're creating a new record and you have a section, it is going to be visible no matter what your permission set or your component visibility is, like it's going to be there. But once you hit save, then it will enact that filter or that visibility, and now you won't see it. So it's really tricky. That is a contender for some improvement from Cheryl Feldman's team with dynamic forms and permission sets and component visibility. The other thing too, I want you to be mindful of is that you can only have 10 visibility filters on your components. So that's something else to be mindful of. So if you're thinking about doing it like with a permission set, you could only have like 10 different things. So you might want to consolidate those to just get more bang for your buck if possible.
Conditions.
Yes.
Can I
So-
throw a wrench into that conversation though?
Of course.
What you good at?
Wow. Well, here's my question though, is I get a little nervous when we talk about visibility and security together, because the two do not go together, in my opinion. Because just because I can't see it on a Lightning page doesn't mean that I can't see that data somewhere else.
In a report, a list view, or even edit it, right?
Well,
In
you
the
have to be careful because actually with Lightning pages, if you have it as a read-only field on the page, you can't edit it in the report. It won't let you. It'll stop you. But you're right, Andy. You're
Well,
right.
So that I just want to
That makes sense, but that has to do with visibility still. They can still see that value.
Yeah.
if you're using something that uses the API as an example too, like the Outlook plugin, that conditional visibility isn't going to hide anything there.
So even though you're hiding your whole section on a Lightning page because you don't want certain people to have access to those fields, they could access them somewhere else. So it's important to actually get it down to the field level security if possible, right? That's what I'm hearing.
That's
Yeah,
what.
so make sure your permission sets are set up correctly.
Yes, back to permission sets. Absolutely. We took a little
That's
detour
where it
and
all
it's
goes.
full circle. So Jonathan, I mean, the biggest thing that I can say to you is test it out in a sandbox and really play with your component visibility and your section visibilities, because they are a little bit tricky and they've tripped us up a couple of times.
Yeah, I would go Brian's route of custom settings.
Yes, custom permissions, custom settings, custom permissions all day long. And thank you, whoever posted his blog. That is the right one that I was that I constantly, Melissa, of course, am referencing and telling people to follow. Oh, I had one more question that I wrote down since everyone's quiet. Are permission sets even going away, or excuse me, permissions, are they going away on all profiles, or is the admin profile excluded from that? Does anybody know? Like, what is the admin? What is the changes
don't
that
know.
we could expect on admin profile?
I
don't
don't
know.
think they've made any announcements about that specifically about system admin or any of the standard profiles.
But I can tell you this much, when you create a new field, and if you have that new setting turned on, it does not automatically add the full-blown visibility to the profile.
Ah, that's true. So don't turn on your field level security permission sets then, the beta.
So I don't know. My guess is they probably will do. I don't know. There's probably gonna be some standard that they're gonna utilize for that, but I
I
don't think it's
recommend just having a system admin permission set just to cover your bases until they make the decision. Then you're not caught having to rebuild something.
yeah, just use that converter tool and then just keep it up to date.
Even if it's duplicative, it's better than missing it.
Has anyone heard if there's impacts by editions? Because, like, for example, professional edition, I think you're limited to the number of profiles / permission sets you can even have, because that was something that they acquiesced on for Lightning rollout. But you have to use a standard profile otherwise for PE.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything there. Maybe that's
heard-
Salesforce's way to upgrade. Those jerks. Just kidding.
I would have to assume that based on other changes that they'll expand that once it becomes GA, that permission sets is the model, but
Or
I haven't seen anything on the roadmap.
Or maybe
Yeah,
that's
that-
what they come up with is a bunch of standard perm sets or perm set groups that reflect the profiles, standard profiles they have now.
Maybe.
that's what I was just thinking they might do. Just have standard permission sets. Who knows? It's the brave new
Yeah.
world.
It'd be nice to know so we know what their naming conventions will be, so we can use our naming conventions in a sense that will make it easier.
I'm expecting spring 24 to be a big one with a lot of that information.
You know, Cheryl is always watching Twitter. So,
Yes, she is.
and she loves feedback. So
I
Feel
think there's also a success community group on it too. Trailblazer community group on permission sets with Cheryl in there and stuff. I'll see if I can find it. Because that might be a good one too for those that might not be on the Twitters.
Yeah.
Or those that are trying to get off the Twitters.
I know when I talked to her, she said if we have any questions, feel free just reach out to her because she wants every input because she wants it to go smoothly. So
Yeah. And for those that don't know, Cheryl Feldman used to be a customer of Salesforce, and now she's the product manager of this whole permission set groups, like profiles, all that stuff, is now her wheelhouse. I think that she got sick of Salesforce jacking around with it and was like, let me just take this job.
it's the old adage, if you speak up, you get the work. So she was fixed, and well, now she's responsible for it.
Yeah, right. So here I am logging into the success community. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but they changed the user interface for it, and I struggle every single time.
yeah,
So
don't get me started on that.
bear with me while I try and find that group, and I'll post it on the chat.
There. I asked my question to Cheryl on Twitter.
She'll respond to you.
I'm sure she will. She's good like that.
Cool.
You guys, any other questions for Jake?
You have an idea? This is a big question because it's so variable. Of how much time doing a migration would go based on just based solely on the number of profiles. Like if you had 10 profiles, you'd say you want to make sure you budgeted X many hours for your migration. And that kind of is the basis for estimating how much tech debt we have.
So I did a conversion of a 1-for-1. We used a tool that took no time at all, but then we also broke one up into the group method, and that was time consuming because you have to really think about what you want to put into each of the permission sets, and then if is that permission set reusable in other permission set groups. So that's where the strategy gets infinitely larger, is if how you want to employ the your methods there. So the 1-for-1 it's quick. Like I said, it's quick and dirty. It's the easiest way to get yourself ready for the next, but you're just swapping it 1-for-1. But if you want to customize a little bit more and put a little more thought and strategy into it, you can break down the number of permissions that you probably actually create, because there's a lot of most roles have shared, not roles, most personas have shared access across the board. So if you want to limit that, you can potentially create like-minded groupings of particular permission sets for different personas that are similar across the board. But I see a lot of people probably just jumping on the I just want to get converted and I'll fix it later model, which I mean,
That sounds scary.
it sounds scary, but if in that sense, if you had 10 profiles, it may not be the end of the world. Whereas if you have 50 profiles, well, maybe now we need to discuss how we want our strategy to work a bit different there. So I think a lot of it comes down to what you actually have in your org right now and how you want to model it. And
how many people are in those profiles? I've seen a lot of orgs with like tons and tons of profiles as a single person in them.
yeah, I've seen orgs where, yeah, you just go into there, like you have 50 profiles and you're like, and who actually has these profiles? Nobody does. Like there's 6 profiles that have nobody assigned to them. You're like, why are they here? So I don't know how to put hours into it because it really depends on your strategy.
You work at a consultant, or isn't everything we do based on hours?
That's time and material, so we're just gonna.
I think just the assessment alone is probably going to take you, a significant amount of time. I mean, depending on how many profiles you have, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would say from my experience of dealing with just what are you going to do for permissions in general, not specifically this migration, but usually that's something we set 20 to 25 hours aside to review, because you need to go almost user by user, if not department at the very least department by department, to figure what people should have. Because I would bet if you went through a typical org, there's probably people with permissions they don't actually need on profiles because no one bothered to look.
Yep, or one person that in that group needs access to it, so everyone in that group got it based on that profile.
And then maybe that person left the company and no one reverted the profile because they didn't know.
Or they didn't know what a permission set was, so yeah, they just kept adding onto the profile instead of giving that individual a permission set to give them the additive properties that they needed.
I think the point is it's going to take some time.
Yeah, that's why I have to get ahead of it
Mhm.
now. Start thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Start planning the discussion with whoever your stakeholders are on why it's important to start scheduling time for this.
Yeah, because I mean, you could go user by user level, and if you have 200 users, that's potentially 200 people you have to analyze to figure out what they need access to. Not trying to scare you off, but
Does anyone else have questions or doom and gloom they would like to share?
spring 26 is when it's all going down. Spring 24.
I know it seems far away, but it's going to come fast.
It's gonna come a lot faster than people expect.
So
I
I mean, a year from now, they're giving us access to a lot of the tools to start turning off the profile side of things, so you can actually start testing it out.
I think, like, for us, it's definitely something that's in our backlog, and we actually have an entire security overhaul we want to do that's going to be part of it. So I think a lot of our planning and estimations and stuff will happen this year, but I bet you the bulk of the work is going to happen next year.
I think the biggest portion of this probably will be the planning, because once you get the planning figured out, right, the execution is going to be pretty, I want to say simple. But you're going to know what you're going to be doing. You're not going to be trying to figure it out as you go.
Right. Don't figure it out as you go. Have a plan.
Well,
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you for coming and presenting, Jake. I greatly appreciate it.
No problem. It was fun.
And we'll be posting the recording up to YouTube, and then the link to that and PDF of the slides to our Trailblazer community group.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And
Thanks,
we'll
everyone.
see you in a month.
See ya.